Welcome to Ancient Geeks, a podcast about two geeks of a certain age, i.e. old, looking back on their younger selves and what got them interested in all this geekiness, and then also looking at everything from the standpoint of their older selves. That's especially true in this episode, as we'll see. I'm your co-host, Tom Grant.
And I'm your co-host, Stephen Taylor.
And I forgot the tagline. We were geeks before it was chic. Which, speaking of chic, here you go. I've got my Andor. I've got my Andor T-shirt.
Shirt.
Yes,
excellent. Being chic in the now.
It's chic. It's hip. It's now. That's actually what I always aspired to, especially when I was like a surly teenager. I just wanted to be chic.
I just remember both of us back crawling around the campus of UC Irvine, just chiking it up.
Chiking it up. All right. So before we get into the subject this time, which is Godzilla movies, what have you been doing lately?
So my geekery this weekery has been because of the Godzilla thing, and we will talk a little bit about Gamera at the end. I just fell down a rabbit hole of all the Gamera movies you can watch on YouTube from MST3K. It's not hard to do.
So they're definitely rewatchable. Like, even though I think we've probably both seen all of them, I would watch them again at a drop of a hat.
So yeah, I mean, I'll reserve this comment. So this is the tease to get you to keep listening, listeners. There are a couple that are 100% must watch, and there are a couple that are kind of
Yeah. So what I've been doing, I had to go buy a gift for a relative who's sort of a science fiction fan. He'll read books that I give him. I found out that he had an interest in science fiction, and anyway, I bought for him the massive collection of everything that Jose Luis Borges had ever written. And I wouldn't call him a science fiction writer. He's more of a fantasist, but he's certainly an imaginative fiction writer. Yes. So I think that would be my notable bit of geekery lately.
Excellent. I guess this isn't the relative that reminds you of Edie from Andor.
No. The true villain at the heart of the Empire.
That's right.
I like that. So we watched something, the honest trailers of Andor before we got on to this recording here. And I think the clip of her stabbing her.
Oh, yes, her dessert. Yes.
One of the high points of the series.
Yes.
What a monster. Okay.
Absolutely. Speaking of monsters. Perfect segue.
So this is going to be an interesting episode because a lot of what we do is we talk about things that we really loved when we were younger.
Yes.
And, we of course reflect on how much we enjoy them today. We explore what really grabbed us when we were younger. I wouldn't say I was a big Godzilla fan when I was younger. And in fact, I think that, I grew to appreciate especially the first movie much later. I mean, I think that was your arc too, which we'll get into.
Yes. No, I mean, I would just go ahead and say this. I mean, there's a sort of series of these podcasts that I think of as new to me, but not to thee, so to speak. Right. Yeah. Was aware. We'll talk about this in a minute. I was aware of Godzilla. Wasn't aware of Godzilla, but I had never watched any of these movies. So these are truly new to me in my ancientness.
Okay, before we slide into the actual episode content here, what would be your soundtrack for this episode if we could afford the music?
So I've got two. One's not really a song, but it's the Godzilla scream from the first movie, which gets replicated throughout. And then again, because I've been watching all this, the Gamera music from MST3K is just the best.
He is really neat.
He's full of turtle meat.
He's full of it. Okay. I would pick the classic Godzilla theme. Da 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 da. That one. I would also pick, maybe we're going to briefly talk about Godzilla Minus One, the most recent Godzilla movie. The music when it's the final battle with Godzilla. On the soundtrack, it's called Godzilla 1.0 Resolution. I love that music.
There's some good music in that movie. That's a good choice. Didn't listen to it. I was so focused on the movie, I wasn't fully paying attention to be able to pick a song. But yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's talk about Godzilla. How did you first encounter Godzilla?
So that's an excellent question. I consider Godzilla to be kind of this sort of cultural background noise, like King Kong, that I knew existed, but I didn't fully partake of. The only specific memories that I can conjure from my youth would be I remember seeing commercials for Godzilla versus Megalon on TV. And I also remember there was a Saturday morning cartoon Godzilla that was in the late 70s with I think we mentioned it briefly in the Monster Talk episode with the abomination of Godzuki, his nephew.
Oh,
Because, Godzilla has nephews. Um,
yes.
I
Maybe
don't
maybe
have,
maybe he has a bad aunt who stabs her dessert.
it's entirely possible. Maybe it's Godzuki's mom.
That could be.
Um,
Yeah.
So I remember watching it. I had no really specific recollections except, again, Godzuki and the Godzilla show up. But that's probably the only actual content that I consumed as a kid that I can, in any capacity. I guess I would add, because I guess it's relevant to why maybe I didn't watch some of this stuff. I realized that I have, especially as a kid, I had an aversion to two things that made it very difficult to watch these movies. One, the dubbing was just so awful that it put me off, even as a kid.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I didn't like subtitles. So if you don't like the dubbing, and it's not like I even had options to watch the subtitle movies, to be honest. I mean, and, the dubbing was what was on TV in 1975 or whatever. So I think those two things combined just kind of sent me down a digression away from these films.
Right.
What was your experience?
It was much the same. There were time slots on local TV where they did
Hmm.
monster movies, and so there were. I don't know which one of the sort of the Godzilla versus movies I saw first, but I certainly think I saw the Americanized version of the first movie as
Hmm.
my first entree into Godzilla with Raymond Burr.
Right.
And I think probably the monster movie uh, slots really kind of leaned into the goofier
Yes.
entries in the
Hmm.
in the Godzilla series. I didn't have any context for it. It was just here are these giant monsters
Right.
and they're smashing things up and frequently fighting each other and they're humans who are having what seems like a separate movie from what's going on the screen off to the side. It just seemed daffy. And I
Yes.
think that probably one of the biggest turnoffs for me was not Godzuki, but Godzilla Jr., the son of
Oh,
Godzilla, which you
yes,
didn't
yes.
see any of the movies with him, but he's just
Was was he in Destroy All Monsters? I thought,
he was. Oh,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
You did
yeah,
see him a
yeah.
little bit. Yeah, he's
I
sort of
remember
cheerleading on the side.
he's kind of very goofy.
Yeah. And he blows smoke rings, and it's just like, what is the deal with these movies? And eventually, because of
Yeah,
Mystery Science Theater, I got to laugh at them. So they
right.
were, the raw material for humor, but I never appreciated them for what they were.
No, I think that's yeah. And I was thinking too. One is this is a period in the 70s where special effects are evolving,
Hmm.
right? And so again, I think my touchstone, as I can constantly realize, my touchstone for all of this is Star Trek: The Original Series, which is not, by modern standards, spectacular special effects, but I keep really getting reminded of how good it was for TV in the 1960s. And so you compare that to even what's in Godzilla, and I know it's a very different kind of genre and a very different kind of special effects need, but
Yeah.
it just didn't look as good to me, right? And again, I'm coming to full consciousness really of all this sort of geekery because I'm, again, a little younger than you are. That in the late 70s, where you do have, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Star Wars, Superman, and it just then if you flip the channel and it's this guy in a rubber suit smashing models, I'm like, this just doesn't really draw me in, right? And the other thing that I think is worth pointing out again to sort of adhere to our theme of ancient
Mhm.
geekery and encounters of all this stuff, it constantly is a reminder to me about how the way in which we as kids encountered this culture was entirely dependent upon somewhat random things. How
Yes.
many TV channels did you have access to?
Hmm.
Especially as for something like this, how many independent TV channels, that is, not ABC, CBS, NBC, that had more prescribed programming? Um, and also, like, when they were scheduled, was it? Because I know, like, again, I know in the Dallas market that I was attached to, there was a afternoon movie, but if you're in school, you're not watching the afternoon movie because you're just filling time, right? It's often were
Right.
these kinds of films, and so all of this sort of when you encounter, how you encounter, if you even could encounter these things, uh, was very dependent on where you lived
Hmm.
and things of that nature in ways that is not true anymore, right? I mean, I've in the last couple of weeks have been able to find whatever I want, however I want to find it, and whenever I want to find it. It just
Right.
really is amazing when you really think about how that's changed.
Yeah. And you had to have the motivation to seek something
Yes,
out. If you could eventually get something on VHS or on DVD later or
right,
whatever, and you had to hunt down books or magazines that explained the
right.
movies.
That's right.
When we talked about B monster movies of the 1950s, we talked about, like Famous Monsters of Filmland and Monster Times, publications like that.
Right.
Um, but eventually I did see the original movie,
Hmm.
without the Americanization of the Raymond Burr voiceovers and so forth, and it was transformational. I mean, it was one of those moments when you come across something you thought you knew,
Right.
and you see it in a completely different light. And I think if there's any purpose I have in really doing this episode, it's to tell people, in a way, you kind of have to pick your targets, but some of the Godzilla movies are really, really good, especially if you understand a little bit more about them. So let me give a little background, and then we can talk about our reactions to the original Godzilla movie, or
Sure.
Gojira.
Yes.
Um, so this all got started because of the re-release of King Kong. So King Kong was in the vault for many years. It was a movie done with a lot of stop motion and animation, and
Right.
interesting ways of using that as a vehicle for having a giant ape, climbing up the Empire State Building and fighting a Tyrannosaurus and so forth. But it had also a human plot, and it was an interesting love triangle between Fay Ray and this other human, and then the giant gorilla who had some sort of feelings for her. Anyway, so that movie came back in the theaters, and that was, I think, in 1950. And the people who made the first Godzilla movie saw that and said, "Huh, we could do something like that." And then the other thing that happened, the significant as an inspiration, was there was a monster on the loose movie called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and it was one of the earliest Ray Harryhausen stop motion animation efforts. So both King Kong and Beast from 20,000 Fathoms relied on this, technique for doing special effects where you have a model and then you move it a little bit and you take a frame, you move it a little bit and you take a frame. And it was this painstaking way of showing a giant dinosaur running amok in the case of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which, not, coincidentally, was also based on a science fiction short story by Ray Bradbury called The Foghorn.
Right. So yeah, in other words, you put one foot in front of the other, and soon you'll be walking out the door.
Exactly. Everything loops back to Rankin Bass eventually. Uh, that is the flat circle that time
That
is.
time is the
It's
flat circle.
Rankin.
It's
It
Rankin
is.
Bass. Sure.
um, so talk a little bit about the people who made the movie, all of whom practically had a connection to the iconic Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. So later in my life, I also became a big fan of Japanese movies. Kurosawa was, the person you absolutely had to watch. Rashomon, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, all these movies. Well, the director of the original Godzilla movie, Ishiro Honda, was one of Kurosawa's uh, as assistant directors and also a close friend. One of the actors, Takashi Shimura, was in both Godzilla and a lot of Kurosawa's movies. In fact, he was in an amazing number of movies during the classic period of Japanese cinema. The producer Tomoyuki Tanaka had helped manage productions for Kurosawa, and the composer who did the really great theme music for Godzilla, Akira Ifukube, had was also a Kurosawa veteran. So the producer, Tomoyuki Tanaka, had this idea for combining, after seeing King Kong and, pondering, what the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms meant, about combining radiation with a King Kong-like monster. And in the development, originally it was supposed to be an octopus. It turned into the dinosaur-like creature that Godzilla is. Toshiro Honda, who was the director, was somebody who came at this with strong anti-war, pro-humanitarian sentiments. He had someone who had seen the devastation of Allied bombing of Japanese cities. And so in both this movie and then later movies, there's a lot of, kind of that mindset injected into the Godzilla films by Honda. The story was originally developed by Shigeru Kayama, a novelist. He got it to the point where they had sort of an idea of what the plot would be. He had a very interesting phrase for what Godzilla would be. It was that that the atomic bomb was a thing of absolute terror. And clearly that's a good description of Godzilla as well.
Yes.
That basic story idea, which didn't have a lot of the humans displayed prominently as main characters, was then, that story was developed into a script by Takeo Murata, who added the love triangle in the story and the interesting moral choices that the scientist character has to make. And all right, and then they also recruited Eiji Tsuburaya, who was the head of Toho's technical effects slash special effects division. And he had been doing a lot of miniatures work for Japanese cinema during wartime. In fact, the Allies found some of his footage that he had done to simulate an attack on Pearl Harbor, kind of like if they wanted to like show to Japanese audiences what in a sort of a fictionalized newsreel like format, what the attack on Pearl Harbor was like. And some of the Allied officials who saw the footage for the first time thought that was actually real newsreel footage. That somebody had actually taken that footage on the historical attack. So it's a kind of an amazing set of people involved in this movie. The other thing that Tsuburaya was responsible for was inventing suitmation.
Right.
And they realized that it would be too difficult for them to do stop motion animation a la King Kong for this movie. And so then they said, well, okay, well, if we put a stuntman in a suit and we made a miniature city and that's the medium for displaying Godzilla, that's the way it will go. I think the other thing I want to say before we get into discussion of the first movie was, I think it's important to kind of look at this from a Japanese perspective. Like, so
Oh, yes.
how did this play with Japanese audiences? The Japanese had lived through World War II, and their country had been severely damaged. Cities were devastated. The economy was ruined. The military was crushed. They had two atomic bombs dropped on them, and all the horror of that. That's the kind of thing that most Western audiences already know, and you can kind of click with the movie as you're watching it, saying, "Oh, Godzilla is sort of almost like a walking atomic bomb."
Oh, yes.
There's not much subtle metaphor there. But also that there was an incident, one of the first H bomb test that a the Americans had kept it secret. There were expectations of where the fallout would go from the H bomb test. It actually didn't follow the expected path, and there was a fishing vessel, the Lucky Dragon 5, that unfortunately got very irradiated and the crew died. And this was a major incident in Japan. And so, a fishing vessel out there with the living atomic bomb is something that also struck a chord with a lot of the Japanese. And you can see the Lucky Dragon number 5 apparently in Tokyo. The ship still exists. The crew,
Oh,
of
wow.
course, had high incidence of cancer and other health problems. I may go see that later this year when I go to Japan.
That'd be cool. You can post photos.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that a couple, I mean, obviously the post-war part of it and the atomic bomb part of it are huge. Uh, I think the Lucky Dragon 5 incident also sort of underscores U.S. hegemony in the Pacific at that moment in history,
Yes.
in a way that was probably more than a little embarrassing to the Japanese. Uh, Although at that point, we're deep allies but still. Um, and the other part that continually struck me in all of these films that I watched, which is again not a big revelation, but you're constantly reminded that Japan is an archipelago of islands,
Mhm.
and the sea is very important to their culture.
Yes.
Because
Absolutely.
so that it just really resonated as I really thought about some of this stuff as you watch the film. And islands are in all the islands and both real and imagined in the
Yeah, and
films.
the relationship with the United States, with a lot of the kind of conflicting feelings about the U.S., being dependent upon the U.S., worried about anything that might harm the relationship because Japan was very dependent on the U.S. during this period. I mean, that's front and center in the movie too. Uh,
Well, I mean, well, not to get too far ahead, and you can probably help me point. I remember very specifically a scene where they're talking about, I can't remember the phrase, I wrote it down somewhere. I thought diplomatic relations being strained. Did they actually name check the U.S. in this first movie? Because I don't remember that they did. They was just very
yeah,
heavily implied that they didn't want to go too far to upset the international order in some ways. It was quite clear they were
right.
talking about the United States, but I don't recall it being specific. Now, Godzilla Minus One it is, but that's a different discussion.
Right. So there is, during the scene where there's a quasi public debate
Yes,
over what to do.
that's the scene I'm
That's
thinking
where
of.
they mention a couple of times we don't want to do anything to wreck our relationship with the United States. I mean,
But did they actually
we're
say the
on our
United
own.
States?
I don't think they said the United States. But they may
I,
have.
I
They
think there's
may
a.
have.
I mean, I'm not trying to argue with you. Yes, I am. It's debate time. Ancient geeks get mad. No. Yeah, I think because I mean, I think it's clearly
Yeah.
implied. I did write it down, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there is this sort of notion that they don't want to talk too much about this stuff in a way that would upset quote unquote diplomatic relations or something along those lines. So
Right.
I mean, it's heavily implied, and I also so at this point, in fact, and I looked it up the dates, and I can't remember the exact dates now. Maybe you're better at this than I am usually. When did the U.S. occupation of Japan end?
It was in the early 50s. I don't remember the
Yeah, so
exact date. Yeah.
I think by the time this movie's made, that's over with. But just barely, right? Just barely.
I'm just looking it up here as we
Google
talk.
comes to the rescue, yes. But at any rate, so yeah,
Okay. So we're wasting time here.
yeah, we are. It's okay. So
1952.
50, so this is very, very close. I mean, it's really, really close because the movie comes out
Yeah.
in 54 and presumably it was
54. Yeah.
made right in that time frame. Um,
Yeah. But still, Japan was mostly demilitarized.
oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. The Japanese Defense Forces were intentionally supposed to be just enough that they could perform some missions that were
That's right.
they're important for national security. But again, you couldn't have another militaristic power running roughshod over the Pacific again.
Correct. So and it's worth noting again, uh, the most recent Godzilla film, is set a little earlier than this one. So this
Yeah.
does become a more overt issue.
Yeah. They talk about the Cold War quite a bit.
Yes, they do. They even show some stock footage of MacArthur.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay. So let's get to the
back.
movie. Let's get to the movie
Yes,
then.
yes,
So
yes.
you had not seen the original movie
No,
before.
so again, to be clear, I
Yeah.
had seen in at least in terms of its entirety, I have never seen any Godzilla movie prior to the last couple of weeks. Again, fully aware of them. I knew about various monsters, but I had never sat through a movie, let alone this one. And
Okay.
I started with as to your suggestion, which I'm glad that I did. I started with the original Godzilla in Japanese with English subtitles because it was, as you have already alluded, they really re-edited it and do a very different job with this film in English, which we'll talk about in a moment. I was so I'll just say my initial impression was I was impressed with the movie as a film. I thought that it had a very interesting story, and that Godzilla wasn't as silly as really kind of thought about these movies as being. It was just, I mean, I put in my own notes. It's a serious movie with a serious story. It really is about like a lot of these movies we talked about in episode 14 of Ancient Geeks, the monster films in the 1950s. This hits exactly in that same time frame. They're all coming out in
Right.
about 1954-ish. And I was struck that this is really another one of these movies about how science is both the villain and the savior in the film. It followed in some ways. I really would. I mean, gets beyond my expertise and someone who's an expert in the films of this era, and you know more about than I do. I was sort of fascinated by the structure of the film being not radically different than some of the ones we watched from the 50s. There is
Mhm.
science has created a problem, probably linked to radiation, if not directly or indirectly to nuclear weapons, in this case, directly to nuclear weapons. So there's a scientist, an older scientist we have to rely on to help solve this problem.
Right.
That scientist has a daughter typically who's somehow involved. And then there's some younger dudes who the daughter may or may not have, maybe the daughter's involved with one of the main characters, and really that's the only female character of any consequence in the film. There may be a handful of other females, but mostly it's this one woman and all these dudes. And then we have to figure out how science can now be the hero of the story by the end to solve this problem that science created.
Right.
Now, and this film does have some, but it does clearly have these undertones about the war, because the one doctor, Shira, I'm gonna get the name wrong. Yeah, Shirazawa, who is the guy with the eye patch, he's clearly
Mhm.
haunted by all of this, both what science has done, but there's some reference to the war, and anyway. I was impressed with the way in which it dealt with the human story. Was interesting and was serious in ways that maybe some of the other movies we'll talk about were less serious, to
Yes.
put it kindly.
Yeah. This is, we're going to have spoilers for the 71-year-old movie
Yes,
throughout this episode, but that's exactly. I think I completely agree with you about the structure. In some ways, I really like the way that Godzilla handled those elements better than some of the other
oh, I
movies
agree. I do agree with
we've
that.
seen. So for like setting up the threat, so that's in the credits, right? So you hear the really driving music, very
Hmm.
ominous. In the credits, you also hear the roar for the first time,
Yes,
which is just weird and disturbing. It was a leather glove that the conductor ran across a double bass to create that sound effect. So
that's
it
great.
sounds like an animal, but it also doesn't exactly sound like any animal that you've heard. And they added some echo to it. So like the iconic roar of Godzilla, which, as I've mentioned before, I have as a tone on my phone. That's only now for when I get voicemail messages. So it's not when I get a text message. That
It's
was
a
pretty
warning someone
obnoxious.
actually wants to talk to you.
Yeah, I know. Oh God.
Why?
um, there's a bright light when the fishing boats are getting destroyed.
Yes.
That's very much like the atomic bomb.
Hmm.
This harsh white light. The village gets destroyed in a way that's mysterious and terrifying in the middle of a storm.
Yes.
Um, Anyway, it's a really effective setup, I thought.
I put moody. It's a moody movie. The moods
Yeah,
are well done, and it doesn't always have to be the suitmation that creates that mood.
yeah, yeah. And this, yeah, the wrongness of what's going on, is there,
Yes.
they find the trilobite
Yeah,
in the
that's right.
footprint, so
And the radiation.
yes,
Yes.
radiation, which can do anything. And there's a line in the early part of the movie. Godzilla is no worse than the H bomb still hanging over our heads.
Yes.
You also see Dr. Yamane, the older doctor,
Hmm.
played by the actor I mentioned, Takashi Shimura, just already kind of in despair, knowing that as a scientist, he really wants to study this amazing creature,
That's right.
but he knows that's not what everybody else wants to do. They just
That's
want to
right.
kill it before it kills anybody else.
And you raise, I think, a point that's worth emphasizing when you talk about this sort of this quotation about the H bomb hanging over their heads or the devastation. That unlike the American movies that we watched from this period, where there is still this sort of idea that science is maybe out of control and has created
Hmm.
these terrors. For the Japanese, and this is quite evident in this film, right? It's not just that science has created these terrors; they've already experienced these terrors, right? It's
Exactly.
this sort of the trauma of the atomic bombs being dropped on Japan is evident. I mean, this is really fresh, right? We're less than a
Yes.
decade out from this, and we so the trauma is evident, I think, in all of this stuff.
Right. And they don't have control over the
Right.
nuclear threat. And
That's
in
right.
fact, at the end of the movie, they make a comment, if nuclear testing continues, another Godzilla may appear because the way Godzilla got unleashed on the world was he was living his life underwater and atomic bomb testing had forced him to the surface.
That's right.
And that's why he was rampaging all over the place because he effectively lost his habitat. And of course, the more H bomb tests, then they're saying in the Pacific, the more the chance that other monsters may pop up, and do,
And they do.
and they do.
Yes.
This kind of the middle part of the movie is primarily centered on the attack on Tokyo. How did you
Yes.
how did you enjoy that?
So
What'd you
I
make of
thought it
that?
was, I mean, again, watching any of these movies at this stage of my life, having experienced very specific and well done special effects, it's
Mhm.
hard not to see the wires and the but I thought that this one, especially in comparison to some others we'll talk about, was more impressive and again, it's hit an appropriate mood. I think it worked a lot in black and white. That helps actually in some ways
Mhm.
diminish the modelness of it all. For example, the colors in both Mothra versus Godzilla and Destroy All Monsters that I watched, they're so stark that they look like models, even more so than when they're in black and white. I mean,
Right.
they obviously look like models in black and white too, but I was. It's nothing compared to what Godzilla Minus One delivers, but it was certainly it was acceptably impressive for the time period. How about that for a sort of modest assessment? What were your thoughts?
Well, I want to separate my thoughts into the human drama and the special
Yes,
effects,
fair.
which are obviously connected. I mean, the human drama makes you care about the special effects. The special effects, heighten the threat to innocent people in the city of
Oh,
Tokyo.
I agree with that. Yes,
Yeah. So I would say on the human drama side, it's really affecting.
I
So
agree with that. Yes,
Godzilla is this unstoppable force.
yes.
They try different measures, including this electrical fence that
Hmm.
somebody feels confident is going to be able to stop him. He just melts it,
Right.
with his heat breath. He stomps around Tokyo, destroying it as thoroughly as the Allied bombers did only several years before.
Hmm.
Just how traumatic must it have been to see this movie and relive that time for people who
No,
had been through that.
I think that's fair, and I was probably overly focusing on the special effects aspect. I agree that the drama of it is quite significant,
Hmm.
and again, in ways that is not. mean, one of the again, I all part of my problem is it's very hard for me to talk about this without it all being one big ball of thoughts because of the way in
Yeah.
which I consume this. But uh, it's almost silly. I mean, Tokyo gets smashed in every one of these movies, so at some point it becomes like silly, right? So
Well, technically, it's sometimes other cities. Like in the second movie, it's Osaka, but okay,
okay, but yeah, Tokyo does get hit quite a few
it
times.
does get hit quite a lot.
And I have only, again, my palate is limited, but
But
it
here in
is
the
not.
construction industry,
Oh
it's
yeah,
job security.
that's right. That's right. Um, so in some ways, again, in rapid succession, watching some of the stuff, it makes it more difficult to take it as seriously. And plus, again, I got this camera stuff in the back of my head, and just the entire sort of trope that it is. There's a lot of tropes that get created. In some
Yeah.
ways, it's amazing to me that there are as many movies as there are, and there are a lot of them. But
Hmm.
so I think in some ways that gets into my head. But I do agree that this film in particular, unlike the other ones, that just felt like there were stakes. And maybe that's an important thing to
Yeah.
stress. It
Yeah.
felt there were stakes that later I'm like, all right, fine. They're going to eventually find a way to defeat the monster and it'll all be all right. And I agree with you. And I did think about it at the time when as I was watching it that this is again in such close proximity to the war, such close proximity to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that this is a far more traumatic set of events, both for the characters in the film and probably for the moviegoers in Japan in particular. That it makes for a more impactful story in ways that maybe the later ones do not have. I think that's totally correct.
Yeah. And there's like one scene in particular during Godzilla's destruction of Japan, just a little snippet where it's a mother and child, and they're
Hmm.
cowering, kind of like waiting for a building to collapse on top of them or to be
Hmm.
stepped on by Godzilla. And she says, the mother says, "We're going to join daddy in a moment."
Yes, yeah, that's right.
That's a gut punch, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also the scene of the which is not a gut punch. Well, it's not great. It's not the same kind of scene, but I just was thinking about it as you were talking when they're all the radio guys are on the roof trying to report on the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
thing. That was I think pretty well done.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're hanging in to report
Yes.
on Godzilla, even though he's about to turn on the
Yeah.
radio tower where they are,
Yes. And
and smash that
it
to
smashed to
smithereens.
smithereens.
There's like children with radiation poisoning that you
Yes.
see in it. I mean, it's truly horrific.
Yes.
And watching it again for this episode, it just made me feel like, man, I will never ever look at a scene of Godzilla or some other giant monster smashing a city as something kind of cool again, right?
Right.
You see this movie, it's like, yeah, that's a big human tragedy you're watching there.
That's right.
Instead of like a video game. There was that video game where you got points for smashing as much of the city as you possibly could.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the opposite of that.
I agree with that. It definitely is, as I was sort of maybe poorly articulating, it is definitely, despite some of the 1950s level special effects, it is a much more, it's just in a different space in my brain than any of the other monster movies that I've
Oh yeah,
watched.
definitely, definitely. And then the ending where they find out that the secretive doctor Serizawa has a weapon that he could use against Godzilla. As part of the love triangle. So he and the scientist's daughter had a relationship, and
Yeah,
she's really kind of, yeah.
Amiko is the daughter, and then Ogata is a high. I shouldn't try to say names that I haven't practiced, but Ogata is the other the dude. He's like a salvage captain of some kind.
Yeah. So anyway, she has more feelings for him, but anyway, so the Dr. Serizawa, who's an eye patch, he was wounded during the war,
Right.
has a big scar on his face. Anyway, he takes her aside and kind of reveals what he's been working on, which is effectively a new kind of weapon of mass destruction
Right.
that sucks all the oxygen out of the water. And there's a horrible scene where he demonstrates it on a tank full of fish. But then she, kind of tips off her current love interest, Ogata, about this, and the two of them try to convince him to give the authorities the oxygen destroyer weapon,
Right.
which he doesn't want to do
Right.
because he said, "Well, look what happened the last time somebody invented a weapon of mass destruction."
Right. Right.
So he's put on the horns of a very terrible dilemma. On the one hand, he doesn't want to unleash the horrors of a new uh, WMD on the world, but at the same time, Godzilla needs to be stopped.
No, and I think this is why this one of the reasons this is an interesting movie and a serious film, which is it's trying to talk about the way in which science can both be a creator and a destroyer, and that you can't control what this technology is used for, so it is a real risk, and the whole question of where mankind was by this point in time, where it could in fact unleash this kind of destruction, and should we continue down that pathway, even if there are peaceful or useful uses for these technologies. In this particular case, it actually creates this interesting moral dilemma for the scientists.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think all of that it's more than just, which a lot of these movies end up being sort of monster, MacGuffin solves monster or whatever, and then we end up
right,
with
right.
a resolution until the next time. So yeah, it really is. This movie is elevated in a way, and I think it's a movie worth seeing, and I think it's a movie that belongs in, uh, you know, the history of film in a way that maybe some of the other ones don't.
Yeah, and it's actually on the Criterion Channel streaming app.
Yes, it is. That's where I watched it.
That's how we watch it, along with a lot of the other Godzilla movies
Hmm.
that we're going to be talking about, but not Mothra for some reason. I don't know why. But there are plenty of Mothra movies
You mean the
along,
original Mothra
not the
movie?
original
Yeah, I
Mothra, the
didn't even
first
look.
Mothra.
Yeah.
So he eventually comes up with a resolution of his dilemma, which is foreshadowed earlier. As long as I'm alive, who knows if I'll be coerced to do it again.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's talk about the special effects. So, suitmation is the kind of the cute term they came up with it. Having an actor in a costume. What they had to do was to put together a rubber suit, effectively, that then would fit on the actor and would credibly look like a giant radioactive dinosaur. And this took a lot of work, and like with anything new in movie making, a lot like the way that Jurassic Park used CGI extensively for the first time. They had to kind of work their way through different iterations of how that would work. So they eventually kind of came up with a costume design that weighed about 150 pounds. They had a 200-pound version of it where the actor couldn't move really at all, but so the stuntman inside the suit then had to. That was Haru Nakajima and Katsumi Suiwaka. That was one of the kind of later revelations. Like who were the guys in the suits? And the first one played Godzilla in the suit for several movies. But anyway, it was incredibly hot inside the suit. Often they couldn't film for more than a few minutes inside the suit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Nakajima lost 20 pounds in the making of this movie from the weight of the costume as well as the heat. But it's kind of a sign of like a lot of the dedication and craftsmanship that went into all the making of the movie. That we kind of, like our first reactions, we saw some of the later Godzilla movies, like, oh, they're smashing up a city. Well,
That's
like
right.
building those city models was a big deal.
No, I mean, yeah, not to be at all derogatory about this. It's quite clearly a
Oh,
lot
no,
of
no, no,
work
you're
goes
not.
into. No, I'm just for my own. Uh, Regardless, yeah, the it's clearly impressive. The suit. I mean, my only real gripe about the suit, the eyes don't look real, and that it's a
Yeah.
minor thing. Maybe it's more in the color version that I noticed it. But I mean, clearly, this is a lot of work going into this. I thought about the fact that. Um, Gosh, I hope they got some of these explosions on the first take because they're gonna have to rebuild this model if they didn't. It's a lot of work. There's no doubt about that, and it's an impressive amount of work, especially for the time, and it was innovative without any doubt. But I am seeing maybe an opportunity here for us. Maybe we should open Suitmation Studios and help people lose weight.
That's, you could dress up in a cool kaiju
That's
costume
right. You can
and
smash a
lose weight.
city.
Yeah. I
Smash
just
a
want to
city.
also mention like the buildings. I guess when they first tried to do the, kind of test run of the buildings and having them destroyed by the giant monster, it didn't look real, mostly
Okay.
because they were hollow.
Sure.
And so they didn't collapse in a way that looked like a real building. So a lot of these buildings they built were actually done with interiors
Oh,
so
wow.
that it would look like a real
Hmm.
building collapsing. And they had one take, right? You
Okay.
couldn't like build this as realistic as you could get it model of some part of Tokyo and then smash it and nobody's going to come back and rebuild that, by tomorrow for a reshoot. So again, it's kind of in its own way, sort of amazing,
Yes.
technology that they developed to do this. All right. They also had a giant water tank that they filmed a lot of the movies in
Lots
because,
of water.
and they kept having to rebuild the costume between movies because the rubber would degrade, particularly if it got wet. So that's why Godzilla looks a little different sometimes from one movie to another. Um, okay. Any other thoughts about the first Godzilla movie?
No, I think that hits all the things that I was considering.
Yeah. I just want to say again, I thought the human story was interesting. I think in some of the older later movies,
Yes.
those stories were toss-offs
Correct.
and felt like filler between the giant monster scenes. But here there was like an interesting story, particularly about the scientist who has to make a terrible decision.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, as you said, this sort of sets up a template for a lot of these monsters on the loose movies, including the Godzilla ones. You know, threat
Oh yeah.
threat goes crazy, destroys a whole bunch of stuff, and then resolution,
Usually it's failed resolution,
failed resolution. Yes.
then resolution, and in the later movies it's failed resolution, two monsters fight resolution.
Yeah. Well, and also too, I mean, I'm gushing all over this movie, but like a lot of times when we watch Godzilla movies, the first thing that they would try, the first failed resolution was they'd roll up with these tanks
Yes.
and missile launchers and other weapons, fighter aircraft, and that would be completely ineffective. And it just felt like when I watched this again recently that it was less ridiculous of just more desperate feeling.
Yeah,
Like
I think that's fair.
it's like firing rifles up at the American bombers that were destroying the city during World War II. It's like you got to do something, but
All right. All
you
right.
kind of know it's sort of hopeless. Okay, so what happened then was this was a monster hit, haha, in Japan. It was a very expensive movie to make at the time, given all the special effects that they had to invent and deploy for the filming of the movie. It caught the attention of American studios, and the one of them decided to buy the rights and make an Americanized version because they felt it wouldn't play just this kind of wholly Japanese movie with a lot of Japanese subtext in
All
it, that
right.
they wanted to make something that would provide a hook for an American audience. And that hook was Raymond Burr, the actor who was on Perry
Yes.
Mason, often a villain in film noirs of the 1950s and 1940s. Uh, and then they had the same Japanese actors, but pretending they were sometimes in the same room with Raymond Burr. Uh,
Yes.
so you watched it. What did you think?
So yeah, my initial reaction was, holy cow, that Japanese version was a lot better than this American version.
Oh my God, yes.
Uh, I found, so I'm going to be kind of negative for a second, or at least critical. And then I think there's a point that's worth making that I saw somebody else make, so I won't take credit
Okay,
for it.
Mr.
But,
Buzzkill, go ahead.
well, I mean, so yeah, I know. So yeah, the voiceover it just seems a bit silly. It is, having watched the first movie, um, having this, granted, this is anachronistic thing. Steve Martin kind of tossed me out too because that's not
That's
what I think when I think Steve Martin.
that's Raymond
But
Burr's
that's
character's
Burr's
name.
character's name is Steve Martin, and but he's just his centrality is jarring. Having watched the first movie, and also, and I don't remember the guy's name. His Japanese contact. I mean, it totally makes
Oh
total
yeah.
sense that there would be someone who spoke English, but he sounded like he was from Nebraska. I'm like, this just doesn't quite seem right. Um, and now, as you point out, the edit, the so I have two things to say about the editing. One is a critique, and one is a praise, or at least a more positive thing to say.
Hmm.
So yeah, some of the editing is ridiculous. Like where like he's talking to the back of the head of somebody supposed to be Amiko or Dr. Yamane,
Hmm.
and they couldn't even match the clothing that she was wearing. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, come on. Although I did read that apparently they shot all of these scenes in like a week, which is impressive in its own kind of way, on a back lot in Los Angeles. Um, Now, on the other hand, this sort of tickles my interest in my very amateurist interest in filmmaking and the learning over the years how important editing is. It actually is kind of impressive just from an abstract intellectual exercise to see
Hmm.
how they reordered a lot of that movie in a way that it works as a narrative, but changes the narrative substantially. It certainly changes the entire. While it's still some of that struggle with Serizawa's there, but it's very different. The love triangle is
Yeah.
different. It's just it is in some ways it's not an entirely different movie, but it's a substantially different story just by the way you order it and by inserting some of these scenes. So I found that was kind of interesting. Um, I guess the positive thing that I would say, and I found a video on YouTube the other day talking about Raymond Burr's involvement, and we'll have posted or we'll post it on Reddit and elsewhere perhaps, giving him credit for helping popularize Godzilla as a franchise worldwide. And I think that's fair. Apparently,
Hmm.
he was a big proponent of this film. He also appeared. I have not watched the '85 version of this. He plays Steve Martin again, which apparently wasn't a
Hmm.
very good movie, but he was. I think helped draw in audiences his film. So I think that's a positive. Certainly, this movie. Without this movie, I don't know that Godzilla would have the international popularity that it has. Right.
Right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I
so there
mean,
is that.
I think you're right to be critical. It's painful for me to watch this movie, but I think you're absolutely right to give it credit for making Godzilla happen in the United States and other English speaking markets.
No, it's just anyway. So what was your? So you first this was your first encounter with the material, correct?
Yeah, and it was the whole thing with Raymond Burr was he was kind of distracting too.
Yeah,
I
I
kept
agree with
thinking
that.
like, why are you in this movie?
Yeah, yeah,
You're so obviously transplanted into this movie
yes,
to pander to an American audience. Just like, could he go away now? We've seen him enough.
that's
Could he
right.
get? It was just like, remember seeing it. It was really just kept taking me out of the movie. Uh,
Yes. So to that point too, someone at Outside the Beltway, where I write about politics, had commented on a Pinky and the Brain episode that was a sort of a parody of this. I don't know if have
yeah,
watched it.
I
I
haven't
found
seen
it.
that episode.
I found it. I'll post it too. But there's these interstitials where someone who's clearly Raymond Burr just says, "Oh, I see." It's just inserted in with in multiple times. It's great.
Yeah.
And it was a clear reference to the English version of Godzilla. Anyway,
Yeah. So
so yeah,
just they decided not to do subtitling
right.
because
Nor
when
dubbing. Well, dubbing of the some of the like not just redubbing the whole movie, I guess, which they
right,
could have done that.
right. It was interesting at the time. People thought subtitling was cheap, or at least some
Yeah,
people did,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And dubbing actually is kind of very hard to do because you have to,
Hmm.
kind of have the words in English, be exactly
Yeah,
the amount of time that the actor who is speaking Japanese is moving his or her mouth. So it's a tricky thing to do, and it's again kind of a technical achievement to be able to do that. I'll just mention one of the actors for this who did the voice dubbing was James Hong. If
hmm.
you don't recognize that name, but you have seen Big Trouble in Little China, that's Lo Pan.
Okay, I think
Um,
it's yeah.
yeah, and then other movies. the Toho, the studio behind the Godzilla movies, produced and then got Americanized, by American International Pictures, the American distributor and recutter. A couple of other voice actors of note for some of those movies. Paul Frees was a voice actor a lot, the voice of Tony the Tiger, and
Hmm.
I think he did some voiceovers in the Haunted Mansion too at Disneyland. And also George Takei uh, made some money off being a voice actor in dubbing these movies and other movies.
I did not know that until I saw it in your notes.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess the dubbing requires a specific translation, so you've actually got to translate all the lines specifically in a way that fits the story, which is work. And I feel like there's sort of two kinds of dubbing, really, too. There's the
yeah,
kind you mentioned where they really try to match the mouths, and it is often utterly and totally ridiculous because the cadence of Japanese and the cadence of English are not the same.
right.
And like when while I watched Destroy All Monsters in Japanese, I would scrub through the English version just to see if, like the original Godzilla, they changed it, which that movie, as far as I can tell, just a straight up translation and dubbing job. But they
Hmm.
try to match the mouths of what we are saying, and it's
Yes,
like awful. And some of the Gamera movies that are on MST3K are of the same type. It's just almost ridiculous. And then this dubbing where they're going to say what they need to say, and we try to kind of match the amount of time they're talking, but we're not
hmm
as worried about the lip movement as much.
right.
But I mean, again, I think it can be, to me at least, I'm extrapolating out as all humans do, that other people must feel like I feel, right? But I always often find it off-putting, and would rather watch it subtitled. But then subtitling it's more work, right? You got to you can't look away while you get your snacks or whatever. You've got to keep watching, which is fine, but it is a different experience when you have to read the film, right?
True. I kind of look at that as a good thing that you're forced to pay attention to the movie.
No, I agree with that in the abstract. And in reality, I agree with you. But I mean, it is still, and I just noticed it doing it recently. It just is a different experience watching a film where you can't even look away for a second because you might miss the dialogue.
Right. But
Um,
I would say that's true of a lot of movies that aren't in a foreign language. Like we talked about, like in Andor, like that was not a show that you wanted to watch while you were fiddling with your
oh,
smartphone.
absolutely,
You would
absolutely.
miss a ton, and you'd miss a lot about the actors' performances. You'd miss things that were nonverbal, that were happening, between moments when there was dialogue. So I think that. I'm not being snobby about it. I'm just
No, no,
saying
no.
I always like subtitles over
So
dubbing.
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I agree. Well, one, I felt this less intensely watching, say, um, the original Godzilla or Godzilla Minus One, and I felt it more
Hmm.
intensely watching Destroy All Monsters and Mothra versus Godzilla. I
Yeah.
wanted to be able to look at my phone while I was watching those movies. But
Yeah.
it's not even that. It is even the ones that are holding my attention. I mean, literally turning my head to grab the 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 soda that I had on the table next to the sofa, or
Hmm.
putting the blanket on the dog. I got to rewind because I just missed. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to really be
Oh,
locked
I
in a
hear you.
way.
Yeah.
That's the part that I've always struggled with a little bit. Um, or I can't more if I want to consume. So I'm like I might have watched more of the other movies if I could have watched them while doing stuff in my office. Because these movies I sat in my TV room and I watched them very
Right.
intently, in a way that I could have consumed more. I mean, I guess I could listen to done the dubbed ones, but I mean, it's just a different experience. It really requires a kind of intensity that most things don't require. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've said enough about that. But
Okay. Well, let's move on to the first of the movies past the original Gojira slash Godzilla,
mhm.
Americanized or original. And thank you again for watching these
Oh,
these
I
movies
enjoyed it. I did enjoy
and
it.
being riveted to your seat,
Well, I
unable
had
to
to
move.
because they were in subtitles.
So Godzilla versus Mothra.
Yes.
So, between the original Godzilla movie and this movie, the studio had introduced other kaiju giant monsters, Mothra being one of them. And there's the whole backstory to Mothra, and you know, it's this giant monster on an island, and people worship it as a god, this sort of primitive civilization. Mothra has these two intermediaries between herself and the human world, these two miniature women, these twin women. How did you like Godzilla versus Mothra? Before
So
we get
first,
into more description of it,
okay, now I have to do this, Tom. I'm going to have to be a geeky pedant.
please
It is
do.
it is my understanding, and you can
Yes,
correct me because you're the kaiju guy, that this movie is actually called Mothra versus Godzilla. That Godzilla versus Mothra is a movie that's later in the 1990s.
that's true. That's true.
So,
You're
I mean,
right. So
come on
thank you
now.
for that pedantry.
Sure, I gotta,
You're using your pedant powers for good here.
So, I mean, this of the ones I watched, I mean, this one I liked better than Destroy All Monsters. I was in, so I was intrigued. This one though, this one's already started to feel a little more. The human story was a little sillier, for lack of a better term.
Hmm.
It's a little less serious. It's not as serious as Godzilla in 1954. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some themes, and I think I'll let you sort of talk about what you think those themes are that are still interesting. This felt a little more. I'm not quite sure what the right word is. Comic booky kind of comes to mind in
Hmm.
the sense that it's a little more about this sort of more fantastic. It's more fantastical maybe than Godzilla.
Yeah.
Now we're in a world where there are lots of monsters, and one of the things that I found interesting about some of this foray into these other movies is this way in which it just has become accepted in Japan apparently that they're monsters, and
Hmm.
some might show up, and like the big egg shows up. Well, it's obviously a monster egg. What else
Right.
could it be?
Yeah.
And so I found it interesting. I found the sort of again there is this sort of like this mythos is being built. Like this is the island where Mothra comes from, and there are these somewhat more primitive people who have their ways. Who again they worship
Hmm.
Mothra, and again you have the two ladies that I didn't quite. I mean, does the other movie explain where the two ladies came from? Because I it's not clear. Not that it
Yes.
matters.
Yes. And in fact, they're in the first movie, they're kidnapped and kind of exploited.
Okay,
Uh, that's sort of the centerpiece of the story in the first movie. But they give more background about
sure,
the
sure.
island and
I mean, I didn't need it, but it was so
yeah.
interesting that they were kind of some kind of mystical creature because they were,
Hmm.
again, they're all small and they all
Yeah.
talk in this interesting sort of um, echoing one another, this harmonious speaking that they do in singing. And clearly they have some kind of travel powers or something because all of a sudden they're all over the place. But
Yeah.
yeah. How did you first encounter this film?
I saw it as Godzilla versus the Thing.
Okay.
They changed the name of Mothra to the Thing, or at least for the title.
Okay.
And then I rewatched it recently on the Criterion Channel, which has all of these
Yeah.
as we mentioned. We should just to say something about the plot. So there's
Yes,
a
please.
giant egg that washes ashore in Japan, and it winds up falling under the purview of somebody who buys rights for it to build an amusement park around it. Like
Right.
they know it's going to hatch, but they know they can make a lot of bank off having rides and concession stands and so forth around the giant
Right.
egg until that happens. And then, everyone's going to want to keep coming in expectation that they're going to see the great unhatching and the reveal of what the monster is then.
In fact, they built an incubator for the thing,
Right. It's a
so that'll
very
hatch.
interesting business model.
Uh,
I think Silicon Valley companies could learn something from.
no, I mean to that right to link it back to the island part, right? And these movies always have fishermen in them, which is
Yeah.
again. But the thing was that the fishermen were like having trouble with they weren't having the volume that they needed, and so they claimed that they owned the egg because it washed up on the shore. Because I guess
Right.
the fishermen had caught it and brought it to shore.
Right.
And so then Happy Enterprises buys the rights to the egg.
Right.
Um,
And his shadowy backer of
Yes.
happy enterprise. So the villains here are two businessmen
Yes.
who just are the kind of the most ridiculously short-sighted people imaginable, and
Yes.
who set up, a threat that doesn't need to exist.
Right.
They, completely overlook the ethical problems with taking possession of this egg and then trying to exploit it for financial benefit. And they're, as you may have alluded to already, they're kind of comical
Yes.
in parts of this. They're really goofy, um,
Yeah, the
which
main
is not
bad.
what you normally expect from the main bad guys.
Yeah, the guy Kumayama, who is the guy that acquires the rights, but actually is working for the more shadowy, truly rich
Yeah,
guy, is kind of goofy. I will say this, right? I mean, unlike the other movies where it's kind of science versus science, this is kind of business is the bad guy here,
right.
right? Rank capitalism is the bad guy here, and there is some science involved, but it's really a lot of also about mysticism because of the because of Mothra.
Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out that we find this is Mothra's egg.
Hmm.
Now you still have, I think, a similar structure. You still have one female with a whole bunch of
Hmm.
dudes. In this case, the female is a photographer working with the main protagonist, who's a journalist. And in this case, it's the journalists that are more active than the scientists. But and of course, you get the egg guy, the running egg
The
guy,
egg guy.
who's constantly eating eggs, cooking eggs. I don't. It's just
Yeah.
crazy. Um, anyway, I derailed your plot synopsis. Do you want to talk
Oh,
about
okay. Well,
Godzilla
anyway,
showing
so
up?
Godzilla shows up. He's threatening the egg, and also wrecking, as usual, big parts of Japan, and the humans have to ask the tiny ladies for help, kind of convincing Mothra to come and chase Godzilla off, both to save her egg and to save the people. So my guess about the goofy villains is this.
Hmm.
So this is the period of a kind of big economic growth for Japan. The original Godzilla was made when, still the country was crippled by
Right.
the aftermath of the Second World War. But, things started to pick up, and there was some discomfort with that because there was a lot of corruption. There were also people who were making money who didn't do it by dint of being particularly smart, or good people. So I think that maybe what they were doing was, making a comment on the kind of people who were getting ahead during this period of economic growth. It was often people who were ruthless, and blind to the destruction that they were wreaking to, and in the pursuit of economic opportunities. I mean, and here these bozos are completely oblivious to the threat that they've presented, and they're even,
Oh yeah.
like in one scene, about to die from Godzilla stomping on the building that they're in, and they're like fighting over the money that's in the cabinet.
Yeah.
I,
What is with the security of this money, man?
it's a different society, right? You could leave your wallet on a table in a restaurant and nobody would steal it. It'd be
That's
there when you came back.
oh man.
Yeah, there was no security there. There are some other things that are kind of unusual in the movie. For example, Mothra dies, or at least
Yes.
the Mothra that we knew from the earlier movie, the
Right.
one that looked like a moth. The egg hatches, and then there are two larvae that spring forth and fight Godzilla.
Larvara.
Larvara.
Anyway, yes, yeah. So and in fact that confused me because I watched Destroy All Monsters first, and the
Hmm.
monster, the one called Mothra, is one of the larvae. And I'm
Yeah.
like, wasn't Mothra a moth? I'm confused, but
Yeah. Well,
it
it's
all
yeah.
comes together.
Mothra stays a larva for a while in these movies. Anyway, and spits silk, and
Yes.
messes up
So
Godzilla, and Godzilla,
yes.
it goes away. Anyway, it's not as good a movie as the original
Oh
Godzilla by
no,
far.
no,
But it was, again, trying to have a moral to it,
it was.
a grown-up story, again about corruption and ambition, and in the pursuit of wealth, you can't just kind of put everybody else at risk. I thought the most interesting part of the movie.
Oh, I agree, and I think, and then again, this requires someone who knows more about Japanese culture, cinema, if including television. There clearly is something going on here with the goofy characters, and it reminds
Yeah.
me of things. I don't know if I can explain what I'm about to say because it's a visual, but I mean, so probably my first exposure, not that I fully understood at the time, to Japanese pop culture was Speed Racer,
Hmm.
right? And there's a thing in which some of the bad guys and even the good guys would like have this hyper reaction to something like
What?
surprise. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anger. And that reminds me of the way a lot of these characters behave, whether it's the
Oh, yeah.
assemblyman at the beginning about his project or the way that, the various bad guys behave. It's just really, it clearly is some sort of cultural reference that I don't totally understand, but it appears through a lot of this stuff in the 60s and 70s in particular.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, and then we watched Destroy All Monsters,
Yes.
which is sort of the Avengers
Yes.
Infinity War of the Godzilla series because everybody's pretty much in it,
Yes. Yes.
monster
Yes. Yes.
wise. Um, how would you rank this one versus the other two movies that
Oh,
you saw?
of the ones that I watched, I think this is, I guess I would probably rank them the original Godzilla, the English version of Godzilla, the Mothra versus Godzilla, and then this one of these
Yeah.
four.
Hmm.
I mean, you could argue, I could have an argument between English version of Godzilla and Mothra, but that's my ranking.
Yeah.
This is the one where I mean, I noticed this in the Mothra. I watched this one second, actually, for whatever reason. But the opening scene of the model stuff, it immediately made me think of the Gizmotic Institute. That was just like that's what this reminds me of.
Yes,
Um,
I can
and
see
of course,
that.
and also, I mean, and again, this may be translation, it just may be the 60s, but Monsterland, that's the best name you could come up with where the monsters
Well, it
live.
was later called Monster Island, which I think is a much
Much
better
that's
name than
better. Yes, yes.
Monsterland.
Monsterland. Come to
Monsterland sounds like an
Monsterland.
amusement park.
Yes, it does. Run by
Yeah,
Happy End Enterprises.
right.
Monsterland. Um, and again, I would notice this one girl in a sea of dudes. Of course, at least in this case, you've got aliens involved, which I think becomes an increasing theme in these
Hmm.
movies.
Yes.
I did not understand the very British dude that was in the show. You know what I'm talking about the movie? Is
Well, I
that
think he was the token Westerner, so they could
yeah,
say this is the UN acting
right.
in response to
But he
the
was like, could you get
alien
him more?
threat. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Also, I start to see a theme which runs into some of the Gamera movies of goofy policemen. I
Hmm.
don't know what
Yeah.
that's also a theme. I don't know. I got a bunch of miscellaneous observations. What were your thoughts about this film
Well,
without
just to give
getting
a
into
little bit of background,
specifics?
so in this movie, aliens are kind of invading in a underhanded fashion.
Yes.
It reminded me a lot of the video game XCOM.
Okay.
Yeah. So, have you played XCOM?
I don't. No, I don't think I ever did play
Oh, okay.
XCOM.
So this is started out as an old PC game where aliens were infiltrating Earth and setting up secret bases and kind of taking people over, making them their minions. And anyways, that's a lot of what this movie is like. So there's this alien civilization that's come to Earth. They managed to enslave the giant monsters on Monster Island and release them. Monster Island has been the solution to the monster problem, like without having to kill them, just get them
Yes.
all into a single location where they have various barriers and other mechanisms to keep the giant creatures there.
It's kind of like Lion Country Safari to have another 70s reference
Exactly,
with
exactly.
monsters.
Except you don't go there
No, you
to
don't go there.
tour. But there is like a scientific research base there,
Yes. Yes.
protected underground. They can study the monsters. Anyway, they get loose. The humans eventually figure out what's going on. Also, some of the humans involved in the story to this point have been taken over by the aliens. So the good guys figure out how to release both the enslaved humans and the enslaved monsters. The monsters eventually, so the humans eventually find the alien base. The monsters attack it. The end. That's pretty
Yeah,
much the
that's pretty
movie.
much it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The um the aliens are called the Killax, and
Yes,
they do like their shiny material.
they
Boy,
do.
those aliens in the 60s and their shiny material.
Well, they're all creepy women,
They
or at
are
least
creepy
that,
women,
like,
yeah.
yeah, this kind of creepy women with this sort of condescending way of talking.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
anyway, and the weird thing that happens to them when they're damaged and they have to kind of turn into worms and
Yes. It
slide
re-
inside these protective shells.
it reminded me of the episode of Star Trek Cat's Paw at the very end where the
Oh
aliens are
yeah,
like reduced down to these weird looking things.
yeah.
Um,
That's a good comparison.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's so I mean it was entertaining enough, this film, but again, it was one thing that I didn't understand how the monsters were rapidly traveling from like Monster Island to Monsterland, excuse me, to New York and Paris. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
on the one hand, you got this spectacle of all the monsters attacking all these major cities, which is a nice change of pace, I suppose. But Tokyo does get hit in this movie, as I recall.
Yes, it does.
Um, and
So they speculate. They start asking the question, why is it that Tokyo hasn't been hit yet?
yes,
And
yes,
eventually it does. Right,
yes,
every place else has been hit, but not
that's right.
Tokyo.
And yeah, at the end, you know, they're the monsters. I guess is also part of the evolution of some of this because I feel like, and again, you've watched more of these than I have. I've watched this
Mhm.
very limited supply, but I have this sort of vague knowledge of all this kind of stuff. That sometimes the monsters become more good guys later,
Yes.
and in this case, they sort of figure out even when they're not being controlled that they have to attack uh, the bad monsters.
Yeah.
Um, and they all get them back to Monsterland and everything's okay. But again, I think part of it is my overall experience here is to go from the original Godzilla movie, which again, as I said a moment ago, it was a serious movie with a serious story.
It's a horror movie.
It's a horror movie,
Yeah.
and it's also this allegory, or you know, this. And this movie is just kind of fun monster romp, right? With
Yeah.
goofy
Lots
aliens.
of monsters, like lots and lots of monsters, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
that was clearly the appeal,
sure,
to people at the time was you get to see all the monsters that you've enjoyed in other films
right.
up to this point.
Now, I will admit on this one, and maybe this is where I'm getting my pushback on having to watch the screen. This one, I did start pausing it to find out how much time was left in it.
Yeah, it's
There was a little bit of that going on.
yeah, well, for one thing, the human story is less interesting.
Yes,
I
yes,
think that's the disadvantage of making aliens the villains,
mm,
instead of people or just the giant monsters. Um, yeah, and although it's interesting to see the
yeah,
all the giant monsters,
hmm
and there's some amazing technical expertise that goes
sure,
into the scenes of
absolutely,
multiple monsters. Like you have to have people above where the shot is manipulating the
yeah,
tails and other things
right,
with
right,
wires while you're also coordinating that
right.
with the guy on the suit of each individual monster. Anyway, it's just not as interesting a movie.
No, I
There's just
agree with
not
that.
as much of a human hook to it. And although you could say, if you did sort of a spy science fiction movie, that could wind up being a thriller of
Right.
sorts that would keep you interested, but it didn't work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did. I kind of thought that the maser cannon on that the moon ship guy had was all of a sudden was a Dos Ex Machina that I didn't understand why it was working. Well, nothing else seemed to
Hmm.
work. And then I kind of thought that the way they did the monster attack felt like a sporting event play by play,
Yes.
which is kind of amusing. My favorite scene may have been the moon base commander who said basically, "Well, we're all going to die, so let's just have some coffee and hang out.
How about a cup of Joe
That's right.
before we all perish?
I did start thinking of MST3K jokes for myself as the movie
Yeah,
progressed,
yeah.
but there was
And so
that.
this was the arc of the series.
Yes.
The there was a bit of a arm wrestling match between the director of these movies, Ashura Honda, and the scriptwriter who was making them progressively a little bit more silly each time. And you really, I think this is where things really fall off for the first generation of Godzilla movies. There are others, they come back and
Hmm.
revive Godzilla and all of his friends, several times. But you can kind of see, like with other franchises or TV shows and so forth, you get a point where things are stale or they jump the shark or whatever. That this is where this particular franchise was
They jumped
showing
the
signs.
zebra, perhaps. They jumped the zebra.
There you go.
He's kind of a shark. Different franchise, but still.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to talk about Mystery Science Theater and Gamera?
Let's do that. Yes. Because I would say for myself, really, my main exposure to kaiju movies in their entirety was MST3K, and it was
Yeah.
specifically Gamera. Now, this is again outside of my youth. I'm in graduate school at this point, and this show's on Comedy Central, and but that and I watched a bunch of them because they're on YouTube, and I will share them as I mentioned at the top of the episode. And I will say this, just trying to pay attention to the movie itself and comparing them to the Godzilla movies, these are clearly inferior.
Hmm.
They're sillier and they're more boring as movies, although some of them are more ridiculous than others. I'll start with one quote, then I'll shift back to you, which kind of maybe encapsulates the whole thing, which is at one point, one of the robots says, "Doesn't he look like Godzilla with a backpack on?" And that may be, in
Hmm.
fact, exactly what we have here, right?
Yes.
But I mean, what? And I have some specific things to point out. But what was your experience with all this?
Same, and the Gamera movies are ridiculous. I mean,
Oh yeah.
they're the reductio ad absurdum of the trajectory of the
Yes.
Toho movies.
Yes.
By
Yes.
the way, there's a really odd movie that comes after Destroy All Monsters, All Monsters Attack,
Okay.
where the story is about a latchkey kid
Okay.
who has this imaginary world where Godzilla Jr., Minilla, is kind of advising him on how to deal with bullies and other threats. And the kid gets kidnapped, and then he has to escape. And in his mind, he's again getting advice from Godzilla and Minilla. It's it's a watch. it's it's a watch, and it also then kind of like you can see where like with Gamera, it's really pitched at kids.
Oh yes. Yes.
Kids are
Yes.
under threat. The audience is clearly kids. It's a kids movie by then.
Gamera loves
He's
all children.
he does. It's a friend of all children.
I mean, I know there's some MST3K Godzilla episodes which are currently unavailable because of rights issues. Have you seen any of
Yeah.
those?
I remember seeing them. I remember the one where Godzilla sort of flies, but he
Okay.
flies feet first.
Of course,
I
as one
remember I
does.
remember seeing that one, but not a lot of the other ones.
So I mean, I don't know that there are. I don't know that they did all of the Gamera movies, and there may be one or two that I haven't seen. I would, and I will post these at some point, um, just to go down and list them and maybe talk some specifics. But I know time is starting to run out here. But
Yeah.
there is the original Gamera movie, which is absolutely worth watching. Again, the kid thing is very central. This is with Kenny, and he's
Yes.
obsessed with turtles, and his
As
parents.
children are.
Sure, but his parents want to get rid of Tibby the turtle. There's a great Tibby the turtle song in in the episode. Um, the next couple are Gamma versus Barugan and Gamma versus Gaios. Boy, those are terrible movies. Those are really
Oh my
terrible movies.
God.
And even the MST3K things are not as good. But you want like the best. There's just nothing better than Gamma versus Giron. It's got some of the worst, most ridiculous dubbing of any movie I've
Hmm.
ever seen because they're trying so hard to match the mouths. This is where three kids, there's like get focused, the kid's still a spaceship. The dialogue itself is laugh out loud funny without the MST3 gay guys. But this is with Corn Job, which is Kondo, the police
Yeah.
officer. It's ridiculous. And this is where the Gamera theme gets introduced for the first time. It is
Hmm.
just absolutely positively, even though I've seen it multiple times, hilarious.
Oh, yes.
And
One of my
likewise,
favorites too.
yeah, that's, you know, that's, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's where one of the robots goes, it occurs to me how weird this film is, you know. And then Gamma versus Zegra, which is the sort of shark-like thing. That
Mhm.
one's great. Anyway, these are fantastic. I don't know what again,
What
time
else
is
can you
getting
what else
short,
can
but
you
it's
say?
just great.
What else can you say? All right. As I mentioned, the Godzilla went through various iterations, they're called eras. So there's the Showa era, the
Hmm.
original run. There's I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, the High C era, which came after the
Hmm.
1980s. Uh, the most recent incarnation of Godzilla, aside from another movie, Shin Godzilla, was Godzilla Minus One,
Yes.
which I was very pleasantly surprised that you watched. I didn't expect you to, but I wondered how you ranked that movie versus the other ones that you watched.
Look, I had no specific, I mean, you said it was good, so I assumed that it was worth watching. I was extremely impressed with this movie.
Mhm.
And I would say that if you haven't watched it, it's worth watching. And I watched it in Japanese it's on Netflix. You can watch it dubbed or you can watch it with the subtitles. I was just really impressed with this movie. It's a really good movie, period. I mean, it's there's the historical power of the original Godzilla movie in Japanese. This is a better movie, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
I think that the human story is really compelling. It's not, and this is, it's sort of interesting to me, and don't want to spoil it. And I mean, you know what the basic plot is. You don't have to, it's not like a big shocker, but there's a lot of subtlety and things happening to these characters that I won't talk about right now. But I'll say that it's no longer science versus science. It really is about war and living and life in a
Mhm.
way that the other ones they touch on, but this one is really it's a somewhat different vibe. I mean, science is important in this movie. There's a scientist, as is always. Certainly, compared to any of the monster movies we watched from the 50s, the female characters are much more interesting and real to me. The the central character has a very interesting arc. I mean, some of it gets well, and talk about terrifying. The attacks on Tokyo are truly terrifying.
Yes.
And when he uses his heat breath, which is, it's like an atomic bomb goes off. It is
Hmm.
just incredible. I will say, for anybody who ever gets attacked by a Godzilla, could you please run at right angles? Because running right in front of him is not the way to go.
Did you learn nothing from Prometheus?
That's right. So, but it was really an impressive film.
Yes.
Um, the acting was great. The writing was great. The visual. I won an Academy Award, but it was for visual effects. I highly recommend it. It's worth your time.
Yeah, I think too few people have watched it because it's a Godzilla movie, and
Yes.
people might feel a little embarrassed or dismissive about it. But really, the centerpiece of the movie is the story of a failed kamikaze pilot
Hmm.
who has to put his life together,
Yes.
has to decide whether he wants to keep on living, and is a big question about like why do we all keep going
Right.
in
That's
the
right.
face of horrors like the ones that he had encountered. There's a redemption arc for his character in this. It's a terrific movie, as you said. Some
Yeah, it
great
is.
acting. Just both him, the actor who played Koichi, and the female lead who plays Noriko.
Mhm.
It's just a fantastic movie. And as you said, the Godzilla is genuinely terrifying.
Oh, it really is terrifying in ways that was just not possible. I mean, you could imagine it and watch the 54 movie, and it has, as we talked about, some of that effect, but this is just truly, truly spectacular. Um,
All done on a $15 million budget.
yeah, that's right.
That's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary.
Yeah. So
So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, the filmmaker, kind of the creative force behind it, Takashi Yamazaki. What a guy. I look forward to seeing his next movie tremendously.
So it also is a testament to the resilience and significance of this franchise, this property, this story, because that was for the 70th anniversary of Godzilla.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
yeah. All right. Maybe we'll do an episode someday on Godzilla Minus One. It's a movie. There's a lot to talk about in it.
There is, there
Yeah.
is.
Okay. So as I said, I wasn't a G fan, as they call themselves, when I was a kid. But certainly there was like whole generations of people. I'm getting into the big questions to kind of wrap up this episode.
Yes.
Um, you know, People who were, especially in Japan, how much of the things that we still enjoy later in life are the things that just etched themselves on our brains when we were younger?
Right.
What do you
I mean,
think?
I think that, and I think this is an ongoing theme of the podcast. I mean, without any doubt, there are certain things that attach themselves uh, to you as a kid that you will be less critical of over time, where you will love in a somewhat unconditional way going forward. Although I think this discussion, because for me, this is not about at all about something that was impressed upon me as a kid. So it is possible to re-encounter some of these things and also have both the understanding and the experience of understanding something even decades after it happened, like the original Godzilla movie, and then the experience of Godzilla Minus One, which is part of this broader discussion, but also maybe being a little more critical of some of these things that you wouldn't have been as a kid. Because obviously, if you'd fallen in love with this as a kid, you wouldn't be as critical as I am maybe of the model work or the silliness of it all. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely. And I think also our prejudices get set up early too.
Yes, that's right. Oh yeah, that's a fair
Yeah,
point.
yeah, and that was really a delightful moment when I saw the original Godzilla, for the first time. Again, kind of, it's like you keep passing something that looks just like a rock and it turns into a diamond.
No, I think that's
Yeah,
totally correct. And that was
yeah,
definitely my experience. I had prejudices, some of which were reinforced by some of the other movies I watched about the quality and content of some of these films. But if we weren't doing this project, I don't know that I ever would have watched the original Godzilla in
hmm
Japanese.
yeah,
So that I thank you for that experience. That was a worthwhile experience, and it is a film that belongs in the canon of great films. I think that's important to point out. And you can experience these things even if you didn't as a kid.
yeah, and just don't, encouraging people, don't be afraid to engage with something because it comes from an unfamiliar culture.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think that's why some people have not seen Godzilla Minus One. It's not just that it's a Godzilla movie. It might
Yeah,
also
oh,
be
I
because
agreed.
it's a foreign
It's a
film.
foreign film. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, and maybe you don't get all the cultural references, or people might say things or do things that seem bizarre to us. But I think it's worth digging in and watching them,
agreed.
even if you can't look away for a single second. I think
Tyranny of
also,
subtitles.
yeah. I mean, I also think that Godzilla, as we saw, sort of one of these um, franchises that kind of goes camp at some
Yes.
point, and
Oh
I,
yes.
I and I think that's probably a risk of every franchise.
Hmm.
Eventually, you just start getting silly.
I mean, look at Andor. How silly Andor is.
That's hasn't gone on long enough. Well, okay, so I'm going to say something. Maybe it's a hot take or not. I'm a little worried about the next season of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
I think you've been
Some of the
worried.
previews,
I have not watched any of the previews on purpose.
yeah, there's a
I, I'm
lot. It seems like there's a
aware.
lot of goofiness there.
I think I do. I think I may know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, so I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Okay,
You're more of a new Star Trek skeptic than I am. Honestly, I'm embracing my youth and just loving it. But you've got to be all negative.
I'm a
It's your
crank.
it's your
I'm a cranky old fart. What can I say? Uh, who takes Godzilla movies seriously, though? Okay, so our now famous wrap up questions. What merch, if any, did you have as a kid related to the Godzilla franchise?
Nothing. I
I
can't think
only
of
had,
anything that even comes close.
yeah, I only had one. There was a model kit that
Hmm.
glowed in the dark.
Right.
Like it was
I
at
remember
a
this thing.
time,
Yes.
yeah, there was like when there were a lot of model kits of monsters,
Yes.
and there was the Frankenstein one, the Godzilla one. There were anyway, so I had the Godzilla one. Is there anything now that you'd watch these Godzilla movies and you have shelf space that you
You can
wish
see the shelf that's
you
behind
can
me.
see that? That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you wouldn't mind having.
So I think two things come to mind, but they're well. I wouldn't mind actually having maybe miniatures of both the original Godzilla and the Godzilla from Godzilla Minus One
Okay.
as sort of comparisons. But and also I forget what it's called. The plane at the end of Godzilla Minus One is extremely cool.
Yes. The Shinden J7W. I looked
Well,
it up.
there you go.
Yeah, it's a very cool plane. That would be my pick. I love that airplane.
It's very, very cool.
And I love what it represented in the movie too.
I agree.
Yeah.
No spoilers, but yes.
Okay, well that wraps up our kaiju-sized episode on, well, Godzilla,
The King of the Monsters.
the king of the monsters. Thanks for everybody for listening.
Take care.
It's time to make our kaiju farewells as we get into the boat leaving Monster Island, thus ending another episode of Ancient Geeks. Thanks for listening. Wherever you get your podcasts, please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review. We always appreciate the feedback. And if you prefer just to reach out to us directly, drop us a line at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. Look for us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All content copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.